Spike Lee, you did an amazing job. Bravo. The Five Bloods was absolutely captivating. It was timely. It was a little long, but it was a great Spike Lee joint. It gave us a history lesson of the Vietnam War. It gave us the Vietnam War from the Black perspective, and it gave us the everlasting effects that war has long after it's been over. The Five Bloods really inspired me to learn more about the Vietnam War. Now, I know some of y'all are saying, well, why doesn't she know? Why did it take this movie for her to learn about the Vietnam War? Well, first of all, mind your business. Ain't nobody asked you. And B, I'm a grown woman. I have not taken a history class in a very long time. While I have a general knowledge about what happened in the Vietnam War, the specifics are very, very hazy. I also was not born during that time. It is literally history to me. And so I decided to take this opportunity and learn a little bit more about what the war entailed. And I believe in the very famous quote that it doesn't matter how you get there, just that you get there in the end. And I really believe that some people are probably like me and don't really understand the ins and outs of the war. And if that's the case, stick around. I'm gonna give you a very brief rundown of the Vietnam War from a high-level bird's eye view. During World War II, due to both Japanese occupation as well as Western colonialism, Vietnam was divided into two parts, North and South Vietnam. The North was communist and fought for an independent Vietnam, while the South was more democratic due to Western influences. Fearing the entire country would collapse to communism, both France and the United States aided South Vietnam against the Northern Viet Cong army. Due to guerrilla-style warfare of striking undercover and retreating, as well as the dense jungle terrain, the U.S. found it difficult to permanently conquer any territory, as well as overpower the Viet Cong army. As U.S. casualties grew and the U.S. bombing of Vietnam was broadcasted on television, the American people started to protest the war and the tides turned, and the war was no longer popular in the United States. It wasn't until 1973, when peace wars between North Vietnam and the United States were concluded, that the U.S. finally exited Vietnam and the war was over. Shortly after, North Vietnam invaded South Vietnam and united the entire country under one Vietnam flag. After over 2 decades of war, the United States sustained about 500,000 casualties, whereas the Vietnamese people lost anywhere from 2 to 3 million people, and that's both soldiers and the civilian population. If you'd like to learn more about the Vietnam War, I've added some links below. Go searching and let me know what you find. The Five Bloods is a very serious movie, and so today we have a very serious drink. I am drinking pure white Hennessy, cognac. This is not something that you can get at most local liquor stores. I've only been able to find it duty-free when I travel to Jamaica. My family is Jamaican, and when I go, I make sure that I always pick up a bottle of pure white cognac. If you know anywhere in the United States that sells this, please let me know, because it will save me a couple $100s on a plane ticket in order to get some. So what did the Five Bloods give us? It gave us everlasting war from the Black perspective. And so it talks about PTSD. While Paul is the obvious case of PTSD, suffering from not only the violence that happened in war, but also not being able to forgive himself. However, all 5 of the men really do suffer in some degree to some type of PTSD. The war might have been over 50 years ago, but the remnants of how difficult it was, the death and the violence, is still deep within their bones, that 50 years later, in hearing firecrackers, they hit the ground immediately. The Five Bloods also talks about the destruction of greed. They allow the gold to somewhat separate them and come between them. This is the absolute opposite of what Stormin' Norman preached. He wanted this gold to enrich his people. Ultimately, in the end, it did help many Black organizations, as we saw in the last few scenes of the movie, but the idea that they wanted to carve it up amongst themselves, that ended up tearing them apart. I think the idea here was that with enough time, war will erode the best of intentions. There was also a lot of education in the Five Bloods. I learned so much about the way that Black people have impacted war. For example, they gave us nuggets on Crispus Attucks, who was the first person to die in the American Revolution, and he was of Black and Native American descent. We also learned about Milton Olive, and he was the first Black man to receive a Purple Heart after throwing himself on a live grenade. These are things that we didn't know about, as we've never heard these stories from the Black perspective. Also, the Five Blood talks about the many ways that war lingers and it affects us long after it's over. For example, Paul, played beautifully by Delroy Lindo, was never really able to truly show his son love. While he did love him, he consistently lived in the past that the war had created, that violence, and that permeated his present and his future. And we see the same thing with the Vietnamese people. They're still reeling from the loss of the Vietnam War. It's not just from the Black perspective, but from the people of color perspective that are still hurting because of what this war took from them. Another way that this war was so everlasting and its effects can be felt today, as we see in the Five Bloods, are the many active landmines that are still in Vietnam today. We saw several people get blown up by these active landmines that were placed 50, 60 years ago in the Vietnam War. Also, the war is everlasting in the sense that it brings disconnect. Otis realized after so much time he has a daughter that he wasn't able to raise, that he wasn't able to be a part of her life. This is the everlasting impacts of war. Ultimately, I think the Five Bloods are about stories untold, stories forgotten, or stories overlooked. It's the untold Black stories of our impact to the United States in war, as we glorify things like Walker, Texas Ranger or Rambo. It's the untold stories of the Vietnamese people that are still reeling from the loss today and how the Vietnam War impacted their country. Like I said, The Five Bloods was an amazing film. It was a serious film. It was a long film, but I think there's a lot that it can teach us, and I think there's a lot of conclusions that you can draw from it. So if there's something that you want to talk about with The Five Bloods, let me know in the comments. I always want to hear what interesting perspectives and nuggets that you picked up from this movie. Until next time, guys. Once again, guys, thank you for watching. This has been so much fun to produce. I'm Candice James, and this has been another episode of Candy and Popcorn. And don't forget, dialogue, not monologue. So please find me on social media, hit me up in the comments, let me know what you think. And if you're ever curious about what I'm drinking, I always post it in the bio, so take a look. And until next time, cheers.